Hello and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Morantz-Cohen, speaking to you from the Drexel University Picture Gallery. This is the second part of our interview with acclaimed biologists Bert Hölldobler and Edward O. Wilson. Dr. Hölldobler is a professor of life sciences at Arizona State University and a former professor of zoology at Harvard and the University of Würzburg in Germany. Dr. Wilson is a longtime professor of entomology at Harvard University. Dr. Hölldobler and Dr. Wilson have just published a new book together entitled The Superorganism, The Beauty, Elegance, and Strangeness of Insect Societies. Bert Hölldobler, Edward Wilson, welcome to the Drexel interview.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I want to continue. I mean, you use the term an altruism gene for certain ants or insects that do not reproduce but could reproduce. I guess I'm not clear about this. But why do you use this term, altruism gene?
As you probably realize, we use it not very often in the book. To make it very simple, actually all scientists now agree, although there is a little bit of controversial issue, agree that this eusocial system evolved from a parental care system. So some wasps show parental care. Mm-hmm. These parental care genes are expressed in a particular stage of the wasp. First she flies around, she builds a nest, then she lays eggs, and once the larvae are there, these genes which code for parental care are expressed. Most likely, no one knows exactly how, but most likely these parental care genes are expressed prematurely in the offspring of the mother. And now instead of taking care of their own offspring, they take care of the siblings, the next generation of siblings. This all occurs, of course, only if the ecological pressure favors those groups where sisters remain in the nest and raise other sisters, and that they are more successful, these groups, as, say, another individual of the same population, same species, which tries to do it alone.
So the individual, the typical Darwinian survival of the fittest for the individual will not prosper. It's the group identity that will.
You know, Darwin said in his book, Origin of Species, that he couldn't figure out why ants are altruistic. Then his whole theory was kaput. I think he was exaggerating.
He came to an answer to his question.
He came to the solution of group selection, as group versus group. And in the Descent of Man, when he finally had geared up enough support from other scientists to step courageously into human evolution, he explained, or tried to explain, altruism, honor, and other superlative qualities, the better natures of our angels of our nature, as Lincoln said it. Then he did this with group selection,
now,
and he was I think he was influenced by his studies of ants.
Well, that's a question I wanted to ask you.
I have to say something. I agree with it. However, he said the group is a family group. So this is both. Darwin said the selection has to work on the family group. And at that time, he didn't know anything about genes. But what he also said, if an individual carries a trait which is not expressed in this individual, and other individuals which carries the same trait where this is expressed, but the trait makes these individuals not to have their own offspring, this trait will propagate if the individual which will reproduce and carries this trait but doesn't express it has much more offspring instead. And you can only have a trait, most logically, the probability that you share a trait with another individual is higher when you are closer related. And this is what Darwin instinctively saw, and he spoke of the group selection on the family level.
So
and this
you think
is a
to make the leap
sort of
to the social level is a bit tenuous?
on the
Well, to make the leap from family concern,
yeah.
altruism, to social altruism, do you feel that do your studies make that leap possible?
You could in humans, but not in ants, because ants do not tolerate strangers.
Mm.
They do not reach out beyond the colony to other colonies and ask for cooperation. They murder other colonies. Ants are the most warlike of all creatures on Earth.
Interesting.
And in many species, particularly the more advanced species, they've developed war to a very high art.
Well, I guess my larger question would be then, and you don't really do it in this book, make that the analogies to human societies, which both support notions of nationalism and ethnic solidarity, as well as, I guess, a rationale for war against the other or difference. Do you feel that you've been very careful here not to make those points?
We have.
I feel that.
And in fact, it's been for a long time toxic to bring up human.
And yet you did that once.
I did it in a time in which it was not a matter so much of warfare as being creative in driving social evolution, which is what Darwin thought. But it was a time in which just suggesting that there was such a thing as human nature, a genetic predisposition to do all the things people do, that was in 1975, ran counter to the prevailing political ideology of the day and the belief of what humanity was by the majority of social scientists. They believed in the blank slate, that the brain, the human brain, we're not talking about ants, but human brain, is in that view of that far back, the 70s was a blank slate upon which is written the experiences of the individual and the group and the accidents of their circumstance that caused them to learn certain things and not others. Now we know that blank slate it had a lot of evidence against it at the time, but generally speaking now we know there are such things as human instincts. There is a human nature, and that controversy has been largely resolved.
Do you feel inclined to develop that line of thinking, to write something more philosophical and more linked explicitly to human nature and human society?
I will.
You will. Bert?
I wanted to add one comment to what you just addressed. There is one feature which is striking. It's our problem in this world, but wherever you find social systems, wherever, in what species, whatever, you find that there are really tightly social systems, you find a discrimination against members of other social systems of the same species. And this is true for us too. When we overcome it, then it's usually by means of pedagogic, moral philosophy, and all these tools, teaching. Now, I often say, obviously, 10,000 years ago, in the Stone Age, xenophobia was adaptive. Groups competed for limited resources. And you had to make sure all sorts of things developed in human nature to identify you as a member of the group. One is you immediately identify that I have a German Bavarian accent. You get it very early in your age, and it's very hard to get rid of it. It identifies me even in Germany. I'm a Bavarian. And so dialects are acquired in an early time as an identification cue, like the ants identify each other on chemical cues. So this is, of course, now a trait which is old, now maladaptive most of the time. And I think only by teaching very early on that you can fight it if you recognize it. On the other hand, I say don't get rid entirely of it because we wouldn't enjoy a football game. You only enjoy a football game because you take sides.
You have some rivalry.
Yeah,
right.
Well, you know, I like you, Bert, even though y'all don't talk pure English the way we do down where I come from.
That's right.
No, which brings me to the issue of your collaboration.
Yes.
You are very different people, both scientists, both bug boys, but nonetheless very different in your backgrounds, in the way perhaps you even think. Could you tell us a little bit about how you found each other and how you collaborate?
I was raised in a tradition of evolutionary biology. That is, I grew up a naturalist and with keen interest in systematics and the origin of species and the organization of societies and so on. The why of biology, why are things the way they are, and how do we track evolutionary trends? Now, this is an oversimplification, but Bert is a product of the great German tradition founded by von Frisch and other major physiologists of his day, and Martin Lindauer, his own mentor. And they developed the very acute, refined methods of laboratory analysis and field analysis that explain how mechanisms were and how they work. So when we got together, when Bert came over as a visiting postdoctoral fellow to Harvard in the late 60s, we found that there was a complementarity to that.
I think our use, to come briefly back, you know, Ed and I, there is a picture. This is just remarkable that we found this picture when Ed was 13 in Alabama and I was 13 in Bavaria. We both, what we got was a butterfly net, you know, and this really stimulates your hunting.
Birthday,
you hunt butterflies. This is a hunting instinct. And we have a picture when we both stand there and stare into the net what we found. And this shows how early we were really. The one guy grows up in Bavaria, the other one in Alabama and Florida. And then by coincidence, I just had the rank in Frankfurt as we would compare it to an associate professor without tenure. When I knew about Wilson, of course, I read his papers, and I sort of addressed and wrote to him, I have 2 years of leave of absence, whether I could come to Harvard, and he very kindly invited me. When I first met Ed, I could hardly speak English. I could read English. My time, we didn't learn speaking in school. We learned to read. So it was very hard to communicate.
But you managed.
But within a couple of weeks, I think I gave my first talk at Harvard. And then suddenly, as we call it, the coin dropped in Germany. You know, it's a German expression. Mm-hmm. Then English became my language. And I, of course, Ed kept setting my verbs right. But I liked, and I think Ed sensed a certain gift in me to express complicated behavioral physiological issues in a precise way. This is what I learned from my mentor, Martin Lindauer. When you do, I'm an experimental person, right? But I became an evolutionary biologist at Harvard then.